Welcome, everybody, to the Commander Pod, your Magic the Gathering podcast for all things Commander. My name is Kelton Howell.
And I'm Spencer Simpson. And today we're going to be talking about common mistakes that new players make. Big shout out to our listener and close friend, McCade Norton. We play with him pretty regularly. And last time we played with him, he gave us some feedback on the podcast, suggested some topics, and this is one that he suggested. So we ran with it today.
Yeah, we're really excited to talk about it. And this is good if you're a newer player, or maybe you have a newer player in your pod, and it could be good to give them some friendly suggestions. Or maybe you still make some of these mistakes yourself. Totally okay. We all make these mistakes, but they are things that we should try and fix and can especially plague newer players at the table.
Yeah, so the goal of today is to help you and us improve as players and then have more fun when we're playing Commander. So we're going to be talking about a lot of scenarios as part of this, and the goal of them is to help illustrate a point. They're going to be kind of contrived sometimes. And I think that's okay. Commander's super nuanced and complicated, and so the only way to learn is sometimes through these contrived scenarios so that when you come across one that's similar, you can understand the trade-offs in that scenario and how you can come out on top.
Totally. Absolutely. And the first one that we're going to talk about is not using your life total as a resource. And this is a very easy one to fall into as a newer player. I remember at one of my first pre-releases, it was probably the fourth or fifth pre-release that I'd been to, actually. I started playing in the original Theros block. And I went to, this pre-release was for the Ixalan pre-release. And I remember opening, I think it was probably my pre-release promo, and it was Ruin Raider, which is 2 and a black for an Orc Pirate. And it has raid, so when you've attacked at the beginning of your end step, you can reveal the top card of your library, and you lose life equal to its mana cost. You put that card in your hand. So there are other cards similar to this, like Dark Confidant is a very popular version of this card. It's probably a strictly better version of this card. It's cheaper. Though you do get the trigger on Ruin Raider the turn that you play it, where Dark Confidant, you do have to wait a turn cycle because I think it triggers on upkeep. But
maybe Dark Confidant generates like more value over time, right? But
yeah, probably true. But I remember opening this and being like, this is bad. I'm not going to put this in my deck. I don't want to lose life to draw a card. Maybe I could lose like 4 or 5 or 6 life. And I remember a more experienced player at the table saying, hey, this card's actually really good. Paying life to draw cards is awesome.
Yeah, and in a limited environment where you're playing with 20 life, right? Like that's significantly less than 40. But also, in most environments that you're playing in, nearly half your deck, for the most part, is going to be lands. So there's like a 50% chance that it's 0 and you draw a land, right?
And that's
even if you don't, paying the life is 100% worth it to put an additional card in your hand. And so that's one of the mistakes people make when they're first getting into Commander is they're so concerned about their life total that they don't want to use it as a resource. And that's what you should be doing. Your life, just like mana or the cards in your hand, are a resource that can help you generate advantage throughout the game. And really, like, the game isn't over until your life total hits 0.
And that's an especially hard thing to learn if you've never played like a control deck before, right? Whereas in a control deck, especially in limited, for example, you are going to be just hemorrhaging life away until you can stabilize the board. And that's okay. That is your game plan. That's what you're trying to do. You are trying to let other players overextend themselves, and then you come in, you stabilize, you remove their biggest threats, and then you lock them down and you finish out the game. But that can be really scary as a newer player to see your life total just draining away slowly.
Yeah, as it dwindles and you get closer to 0, the stress can start to pile up. And actually, that starts to make the decisions more complicated, right? That's what makes control decks really tough. There's a couple ways that you can be paying life for this advantage. And the first one we want to talk about was paying life for things like card draw and interaction. So for card draw, primarily this effect is in black, right? So we have things like Bolas's Citadel, or like you were just talking about, Dark Confidant or Ruin Raider. There's ways to put additional cards in your hand by paying life. But one of the ones I want to talk about specifically is actually Sylvan Library, which is, kind of an expensive card, may not be in every deck, but I think is the primary example of why losing life to put cards in your hand is so powerful. So for those who don't know, Sylvan Library is a 2-mana enchantment. And at the beginning of your draw step, at the beginning of your draw step, you draw 2 additional cards in addition to the first one you draw. And then you can either put 2 cards you've drawn this turn back on top of your library, so that includes your first draw, or pay 8 life for each, or 4 life for each one that you don't. So you draw 2 additional cards, and you can keep both of them, or you can pay by paying 4 life, or you can put it back on top.
Yep.
And often when I see people playing this card, it's not always the right decision, but they'll pay 8 life to put 2 more cards in their hand.
If it's 2 good cards, if they're really important for your game plan, pay the 8 life. Get the cards now. Accelerate. Go.
Yeah, and it's so much life. Like other card draw effects are like draw 2 cards, lose 2 life, which is a little more intuitive.
It's a fifth of your life in Commander.
Yeah, it's a ton, but it's so good. So I think that just really illustrates like how much advantage you can generate by using your life as a resource.
And there's definitely less drastic examples of this. For example, Night's Whisper is just a really good card draw card. You draw 2 cards and you lose 2 life. Same thing with Deep Analysis. When you flash it back, you're losing 2 life, you're drawing 2 cards. And this is just good. And especially in black, you're going to notice that a lot of the examples from this section where we're using life to pay as a resource, a lot of it is in black because that's part of how that slice of the color pie works. Black, you are spending your life to get some sort of advantage in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. But if the alternative is paying more mana for an effect, I will always choose to pay some life unless it's going to kill me.
Yeah, definitely. And this is why Phyrexian mana is so good. So you may see a Phyrexian mana symbol in the mana cost of a card, and that just means that you can either pay a mana of that color or you can pay 2 life. And a lot of times players are just going to pay the 2 life because it's better to conserve the mana and use it for something else if you can.
Yeah, well, it gives you a mana. And I think that brings us into our next point, which is paying life for mana, right? So Phyrexian mana effectively does that. I would say that's pretty similar to the effect of something like a shock land. Like, you pay 2 life. So shock lands, for those who don't know, there's a card called Shock, and it's a 1 mana instant, deals 2 damage to any target. So these lands are affectionately called shock lands because when they enter the battlefield, they enter tapped unless you pay 2 life. And if you pay 2 life, they enter untapped, and you can use them that turn, and they tap for 2 colors of mana. Yeah. So it's like they shock you. You've been hit by shock. Yep exactly. A shock land, effectively, on the turn you play it, is like paying Phyrexian mana for an additional mana on that turn. And is often worth it. Like on turn 3, if all you have in hand is a shock land, I would certainly pay 2 life to get that to enter untapped.
Which, if you have a play. If you can use the mana.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you can use the mana. So there's, again, instances where you don't want to pay that life, but I would say more often than not, you're very happy to pay life for these type of effects. And in fact, paying life for mana is so powerful that there's effects that are banned in Commander that do that.
Yeah, like Channel and Fastbond. Channel is green for, I believe it's a sorcery, and for the rest of this turn, you can pay 1 life to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Really good. Totally busted. It's banned for a reason. And the other one is Fastbond, and that's 1 green for an enchantment, and you can pay 1 life to play a land card from your hand. So you can basically just play any land card you ever draw, and there's no limit to the number of lands that you can play in a turn because you're just playing 1 additional life for each land past the first. Once again, very, very good.
Yeah, still busted, but I would argue not as busted as Channel. It's not going to let you play 2 Eldrazi on turn 2.
Turn 2, yeah. Yeah, Channel is particularly bad. And so that just illustrates what a powerful effect it is to be able to pay life for mana. And then the third example of paying life for advantage would be paying life for interaction. There's a lot of spells, especially in black, where as an additional cost to casting the spell, you need to pay some amount of life in order to cast that spell.
Yeah, so there's things like one that released is actually a really sweet card that I'm going to start playing in my deck. So Bitter Triumph. Yeah. And the additional cost is you either pay 3 life or you discard a card, which often you want to be doing in decks anyways.
Yeah, so if you're playing a Reanimator deck, it's just awesome because you're looking for ways to discard cards, and this one puts that way on a really efficient removal spell. And so it's just win-win for you. That's so good. But if you're not playing that kind of deck, if you want those cards in your hand, paying 3 life is not a big cost to get rid of a giant threat on the board.
No, yeah, absolutely not. In fact, some of the best cards that have been kind of the kings of the hill for a long time in removal, like, oh my goodness, I just had it on the tip of my tongue and now I lost it.
Feed the
Anguished
Swarm?
Unmaking. Anguished
Oh,
Unmaking.
English fun making.
Yeah, right. Which is pay 3 life, right? Exactly 3 life to destroy a permanent or exile a permanent.
Yep.
Yeah, paying life for this type of effect. I think another really good example of this is Toxic Deluge, debatably the best board wipe in the format. You pay 3 mana. It costs 3 mana, and then you pay X life, and then all creatures get -X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life you pay.
So good.
Yeah,
It's
for
so
3
good.
mana, you can wipe the board. I would happily pay 10 life any day into Toxic Deluge if it meant resetting the board state and getting rid of some scary threats.
Yeah, and additionally, it's very good because it gets around indestructible, right? Because it's getting negative toughness, that gets around indestructible, and oftentimes it's just devastating to someone who's so far ahead.
Yeah, really good reprint, and has been getting some really good card, and has been getting some sweet reprints recently as well, which is
We love
really
that.
good to see.
That's great.
I think a way to think about this that I think is a little more intuitive for me, and hopefully will be for other players as well, is that there are also removal spells that give your opponent's life. So something like Nature's Claim, which is 1 mana, destroy target artifact or enchantment, its owner gains 4 life. Or Swords to Plowshares, 1 mana, destroy exile target creature, its opponent gains life equal to its power. Every time you cast a spell, I can guarantee you your opponent would rather have whatever permanent that you destroyed than the life you gave them. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So I think that really illustrates that, like, I'd be willing to say, I'm going to pay 10 life to keep my 10/10 on the board.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So again, life is a resource. Make sure you're using it. It's totally worth it to pay life for any of these effects.
And there's also another one that falls into this category of not using your life total as a resource and is maybe a little bit trickier to spot, is making bad blocks, right? If you're at a safe life total, let's say that you're 30 or above, and you have your commander out or a really important value engine piece, and someone swings at you with a big creature, like maybe it's an even a 10 power creature, don't chump block. Don't throw your commander in front of that. Just take the 10 damage. And, by chump blocking, it's only saving you that damage for 1 turn. Having an important game piece out, having an important creature out could help you find a better answer once it gets back to your turn and solve the problem long term, not just stopping that damage for 1 turn. Because it's going to come back around. You're going to be in the same spot. They're going to swing at you again with a 10/10.
Yeah, exactly. If it's worth going down to 20 life, right? If you're at 30, say you're at 30, say you're at 20, and someone's swinging a 10/10 at you, it's worth going down to 10 life at the chance of maybe finding something to win or remove this or gain some other advantage somehow, than to just like take yourself out of the game and get swung at again the next turn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
100%.
Commander's a 4-player game. So if you get hit with 10 damage, they might feel bad and not swing at you the next turn. Or they might be like, oh, okay, we should spread the love, attack someone else. So you're also kind of taking the target off your back by just taking the damage. It's really not that bad to get hit with a bunch of combat damage if it means saving a really important game piece for your plan and giving yourself the opportunity to do something really good on a future turn.
Yeah, absolutely. Puppy dog eyes is a very valid strategy sometimes if you're trying to stay alive.
Absolutely. Just look really sad about that 10 damage.
Yeah. Oh, man, but it would kill me. Yep, I think that's definitely a good way to handle it. So one of the next things we talked about as being a mistake that new players often make is they have improper threat assessment, which admittedly,
So what does that mean?
Yeah, so admittedly it's a very difficult thing, but it's actually seeing what cards are affecting your chances at winning the game, right?
Yep.
Not every big creature that is swinging at you for 10 damage is actually a quote-unquote threat, right?
Yeah, and that's really hard to see, especially if you haven't played a lot of Magic. Someone may have a really big creature that turns out to be like 30/30. And if you haven't played very much Magic, that's the biggest creature you've ever seen. And you're like, okay, obviously this is the biggest threat on the board. But maybe it doesn't have a way to actually do that damage. Maybe it doesn't have trample. Maybe it doesn't have flying, and you can just throw a 1/1 in front of it or a token in front of it, and it may not actually be that scary. So some of the common mistakes in improper threat assessment are removing the first thing on the board. It can be really tempting to interrupt an early play if you have interaction in your hand, but that may not be the best thing to spend that interaction on.
Yeah, Kelton, do you have an example of when maybe
Yeah.
you've done this?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We had a game the other day where it was a pretty slow game. It was a really casual table. Nobody ramped on their second turn, first or second turn, and Spencer, plays a talisman and is the only one at the table ramping. And I had multiple interactive pieces in my hand, so I snapped off a memory lapse on the talisman and put it on top of his deck, and it definitely interrupted his tempo. And
Oh my gosh.
it was pretty funny.
It kept me from ramping. It blanked my next draw. Thank heavens I had another land in hand, or else I might have just been screwed for the rest of the game.
Yeah, that was definitely not the best play, but I had a lot of interaction in my hand. And I just wanted to get it out on the board.
Yeah, totally. Like we've said, it's a lot of this is very situational, right? And sometimes that may be the right answer. And historically, the deck I was playing pops off. So
it's a very fast deck. It is Rakdos, and it is so fast.
Yeah, it can be pretty spooky. So I wasn't too salty about it. Maybe a little bit, but not too bad. But again,
funny,
removing the first thing on board, or the first thing that seems even remotely scary, isn't always the right thing to do. And especially in lower power decks, and sometimes in new players' decks, there's not a lot of interaction. So the interaction that you do have is pretty precious. You need to make sure you're using it. Yeah, you need to make sure
it
you're
scales
using
with
it for
how
things.
powerful the decks are, right? Lower power level decks don't need that much interaction. They probably don't have that much interaction. And the number of things that need to be interacted with are probably pretty low. As decks get more powerful, there's going to be more interaction, more of a need for interaction, and more things that need to be interacted with. So scaling with the game, that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, exactly. And something that I think we've been able to do as we've gotten better and we've played more and our threat assessment has improved is that we've been able to actually get away with intentionally including less interaction in favor of things that maybe advance our game plan more, because we're not, snapping it off at the first thing that, that seems scary.
Absolutely.
I think another mistake that people make is that they remove cards that were powerful that one time. They have a little bit of a recency bias where someone had a Blood Artist on board and it did the last 5 damage to kill them. And so the next time someone plays a turn 2 Blood Artist, they destroy it immediately. Don't get me wrong, Blood Artist.
We all do this.
Yes.
I mean, I've lost to some of your commanders so many times that I definitely have a bias against them staying on the board. And I'm going to look to remove them every time they come down, because I know that on that turn or a turn soon thereafter, you can win. I know how your decks work. I've seen them in action. But it may not always be the right choice. That could just be my bias from my experiences in those games, and that's actually improper threat assessment. So yeah, like we mentioned before, creatures that are just big but don't necessarily have evasion or trample. That's they might be powerful that one time when you don't have any blockers, or maybe they have something that makes it unblockable, and that could make it feel really scary. Just anything that's not winning the game or preventing you from winning the game is probably not the right target for your interaction.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, like a good reference for this is in CEDH. I've started playing CEDH competitive Commander recently. And in competitive Commander, you're really only ever interacting in a way that increases your chance of winning. Now, that's not always the case in casual, because casual, we're here to have fun. And it's sometimes fun to make your friend mad by removing their thing, right? Like, we're here to have fun. That being said, if the goal is to use your interaction properly and increase your chances of winning, then maybe removing the first thing on board, the scary, is not the right thing to do, right? You should be holding it up until someone is threatening your life total in a way that is lethal, right? That's going to take you out of the game and keep you from playing. So I think the natural follow-up question to this is, okay, well then what do I remove? Right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple things here. Is one, things that are objectively powerful and game altering. So again, things that are generating enough advantage for your opponents or potentially keeping you from gaining an advantage, or things that directly affect your game plan.
Yeah, so some good examples of pieces like this are just powerful advantage pieces like Rhystic Study, Bolus's Citadel. I think Smothering Tithe probably belongs on this list. Things that if they come out and they're not answered are just going to give so much advantage over the course of the game or even just the next couple of turns that it's going to put them so ahead and just increase their win percentage a ton. Another thing is things that either heavily affect the board state or can repeatably affect the board state. So obviously this applies to board wipes. If you're super ahead and somebody plays a board wipe, that's really going to affect the board state in a way that's very negative for you if you're so far ahead. So you're going to want to counter that. But some other examples are things like Dictate of Erebos or Portal to Phyrexia, which are going to, give the player who played them a disproportionate advantage over the rest of the table.
Yeah, exactly. So like Dictative Erebos, for example, is one I put on this list because it's something I've put in one of my decks and really want to play because it's so cool. But I did get a chance to play it the other day, and it feels really bad to play. Like, it's so good. So Dictative Erebos is a 5-mana enchantment, 4 and a black, with flash, so you can cast it at instant speed. And whenever a creature you control dies, so the owner's control, each opponent sacrifices a creature. So in a deck that cares about sacrificing creatures, that's a repeatable board wipe that's going to keep your creatures on board if you have a chance to reanimate them, which in my deck I do, and continuously wipe opponents' boards, which is a way better target for interaction than something I might have played earlier on. And again, can be hard to know if you're playing against a deck for the first time. So another thing, and we've kind of mentioned this a couple times on our way to this list, is creatures attacking you for lethal, right? And I would say creatures specifically attacking you for lethal.
Yes. If they're attacking your opponents for lethal, this is not a bad thing. You should not remove it. You should help it. You should clear the path for it.
Yeah. More power to whichever opponent is taking out your other one and tapping out to do so.
Yep, exactly.
And then the last thing here is like win conditions, like combo pieces. Again, in lower power decks and at newer tables, you're not going to see as many of these. But you might see like some powerful anthems, so things like Coat of Arms or Cathar's Crusade that are continuously making creatures bigger. And I should say, we should explain these. Cathar's Crusade is that whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So your creatures are just getting
really good.
bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The other one is Coat of Arms, which is each creature you control, or each creature, right? Or is it you control?
No, it's each creature, because this really messes with the entire board. It's not just your creatures.
Yeah, but if you're playing this, more often than not, you're disproportionately going to be generating advantage with it, right?
You're playing the goblin deck, and so all of your goblins are getting more buffs than your opponent's creatures that only share 1 or 2 creature types with.
Yep, exactly. So it's each creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature on the battlefield that shares at least 1 creature type with it. So it just makes boards extremely big, and you might see this in more casual pods, and is definitely something to try to interact with because it will lose you the game. So
and this kind of threat assessment is really difficult. It is okay. It's experienced players also make these mistakes. We talked about how we make these mistakes all the time as well, but it gets easier as you play more Commander, and especially with the same people, you can see people's decks, see how they work, know which pieces you need to look out for, which combo pieces, and they don't have to be infinite combos. We say combos, and we just mean synergy, cards that combine to make powerful effects. Once you can spot those more easily, you know what things really need to be removed and what things can just kind of be left on the board, and they're not as big of a threat as they may seem.
Yep, exactly. So the next thing we want to talk about that is a mistake that new players often make is not asking to read cards.
This one can get you into trouble, and we actually have played recently with a newer player, And it's easy to see them being hesitant to ask to read every card because it slows down the game. You have to ask them to hand you the card from across the table, and it's okay. It's okay to have to read the cards if you're a newer player. There's so many cards. There's nearly 30,000 cards in Magic. It's impossible to know all of them. And, even people who've been playing Magic for a long time need to read new cards or cards they haven't encountered before or don't encounter very often.
Yeah, no one is going to look at you sideways for asking if you can read their card or asking them to read the card to you. We've run into this before where players often know what their cards do, and so they'll explain it, but maybe not all the way. So it is worthwhile, right, to say, hey, what does that card do? Can I read it?
Because cards have a lot of text on them, and sometimes multiple effects, and some of them may be relevant at one time, and some other effects may be relevant at other times. It's good to just read the whole card.
Yes, exactly. So if you don't know, it's totally okay to ask. And it does get easier as you play, like a lot of these things, like threat assessment. It gets easier as you play. A lot of cards do similar things and have keywords that, are similar, although that list is constantly expanding, and so it becomes harder and harder to know what cards even do. But that may even be more reason to ask, right? Some cards might do similar things, but not exactly the same thing. So if you assume that it's doing something similar and it's not, and you end up getting punished for it,
that's on you.
It's kind of on you for not asking, and it's unfortunate. But I think that's something that is a habit that people should get into, is to ask what cards do.
So it's totally okay to ask to read cards, but as a side note, make sure to always ask before touching somebody else's card. This is just good etiquette. And I know, Spencer, this is kind of a pet peeve of yours.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. So we have become significantly more proxy friendly in our group, but for a time I wasn't, and I was playing with some of these, fancy, expensive cards, which for me at the time was like $20, right? Sure. But like that's an expensive card to be playing with, and I don't want it to get,
and it's paper,
and it's paper, and it's very fragile. So some people's cards might be expensive or fancy or rare. People want to play with blinged out decks sometimes, and they have no idea where your hands have been. So make sure you always ask before touching someone else's cards, and also always be gentle with them, right? Respect other people's property. Make sure that you're treating their cards with respect in the way that you would expect them to for you as well.
Absolutely. The next mistake that newer players tend to make is not playing at instant speed. And this is a really easy trap to fall into because it's different than a lot of other card games, a lot of other trading card games like Pokemon or Lorcana or
Hearthstone.
I don't remember about
Hearthstone.
Yu-Gi-Oh. Yeah. Hearthstone.
Yu-Gi-Oh technically too. You have traps in Yu-Gi-Oh, but you're not actively playing during other people's turns.
Yeah, so that's weird. If you've never played Magic before and you've played other trading card games, it's weird to remember, oh yeah, I can do stuff on your turn too.
Yeah, and I think that's something that makes Magic really unique, is that you have the opportunity to do stuff on other people's turns. And often new players don't. Often new players look at their turn and they tap all their mana and they play all their cards and they say, okay, your turn. And that's a fine way to play Magic. But our argument is that you'll have significantly more fun playing Magic if you're playing more Magic. You can play 4 times as much Magic if you're playing on the other 3 players' turns rather than just yours.
It also significantly increases your win percentage.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the first question, I think a natural question to this is, how do I do that? Well, first you need instant speed effects, right? And there are effects. We're going to talk about ramp, card draw, and interaction a lot in a lot of our podcasts. Yeah. But that's because those are kind of the big 3 of things that you're including in your deck, right? Like every deck needs those. And if you want to play at more instant speed, you need to include more instant speed effects in those areas. Yep.
Yeah, because they're just good. And a lot of times it's worth it if the card is maybe slightly less efficient than a sorcery speed effect. It's worth it for the instant speed. So, for example, for drawing cards, you can play things like Fact or Fiction, which is an instant speed draw effect, Deadly Dispute. They recently printed a new version of the card Divination, which is just divination, but at instant speed, it's called Quick Study. These cards are all awesome, and they allow you to keep up the opportunity to play that draw spell not on your turn, on 4 turns instead of just on 1 turn. Same thing with ramp. There's effects like Growth Spiral and Sakura Tribe Elder, which is a creature but has instant speed, access to that ramp. We'll talk about that here in a moment. And in removal, cards like Infernal Grasp or Generous Gift. It's you want to make sure you can see all of the threats available to you before committing towards removing one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing to consider is that if you have like tap effects or activated abilities, whether they're on creatures or artifacts, you don't have to use those on your turn unless the card explicitly states, right? Some cards do explicitly state activate only as a sorcery.
Yep, those ones you do. Those ones are your turn only, but a lot of them don't.
A lot of them don't. And so make sure that sometimes it can be, again, there are exceptions to all rules that we're talking about here today, but more often than not, your play experience, you're going to improve as a player and you're going to have more fun if you start playing at instant speed.
Yeah, and you listed out a couple of those exceptions of when you might want to play something at sorcery speed, even if it's an instant. I think it's really good to mention those. For example, if you're playing against a blue player like Spencer and they are tapped out, then that gives you a window. It gives you an opening to try and remove a big threat or do something without them being able to respond with counter magic.
Yeah, and sometimes you can do that at sorcery speed on your turn, right? They've tapped out on their turn, you untap on your turn, and then you can interact with them without having a chance to respond. I would argue, also in this scenario, like this is an exception to the rule, but hopefully you've been keeping up mana in your previous turns, so when they do tap out on their turn, you can interact on their turn and then untap with all of your mana on your turn again. So you don't have to. You still don't have to do it at sorcery speed. Additionally, if the player isn't exactly after you in turn order and they've tapped out, you don't have to do it on your turn. You don't have to interact with them on your turn. You just have to do it before their turn.
Yeah.
So, and this kind of leads us into why would you want to do this, right? Again, we've talked about makes you a better player and it will improve your play experience. But how does that make you a better player and make you or improve your play experience? And the first one here is that it just gives you flexibility. You get to keep your mana up for interaction. If you have an interaction spell, like a counter spell or removal, and you also have a card draw spell in your hand, if you keep up the mana, you get a chance to either remove something scary that shows up or save that for later and draw some cards instead.
Yeah, and Sakura Tribe Elder is a really great example. So it's 1 and a green for a creature with the activated ability, sacrifice this creature, search your library for a basic land, put that land on the battlefield tapped. And it's so good to save that effect instead of just paying the 2 mana, getting the creature, immediately sacrificing it to go get that land. The land enters tapped, you're not doing anything with it anyways. So save that until your last opponent's end step, so you can get the land and then untap on your turn, because you can do things with that creature. You can use it as a blocker and then sacrifice it in response before damage is dealt. Or if you still aren't sure which color of land you need to get for, either some interaction in your hand or card draw or something like that, you can wait to see what everyone else does to see which land you want to get that's going to give you the best play.
Yeah, and you never know what's going to happen, right? There are symmetrical draw effects in Commander where it says, hey, everybody gets to draw a card. You don't know. Someone could play that, and you draw a card, you have new information, and now you need a different color of mana from your ramp spell, your Sakura Tribe Elder. So, and I think that's a really good example of why you want to play instant speed and not just count it as like a rampant growth, right? There's a reason it's better than that, and it's because it's a creature. The second reason that you want to play at instant speed is that it gives you more information and your opponents less. Right? As your opponents are reaching their turn and you have mana up, they don't know what's in your hand and what you can do, and they have to play with that less information. And then as they're playing, you continue to gain more about what they have in their hand, or at least the things they've played out of their hand and how much mana they have available. And so it puts you at a serious, like an actual measurable advantage during the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only are you feeding them less information, but oftentimes they may interpret it as wrong information. If you're going to leave up 2 islands when you pass your turn, that's signaling, hey, I may have counterspell in my hand. And so there's a chance that they're going to play differently because they see that. And that's really, really powerful in Magic. A lot of Magic is about information, trying to get more information than you're giving. And this is a really good way to do that.
Yes, I am particularly bad at this. Kelton is very good at this. There's been more than once that he has bluffed his way out of a scenario where I was going to try to remove his stuff. Fortunately, I have learned that at some point you have to try to make someone have the removal piece.
Yep.
But bluffing is a big skill in Magic. And again,
yeah, it's a tough skill. It's
tough.
And I don't do it particularly well, but I'm getting better at it. And it's hard because if you bluff something one time, you kind of need to keep bluffing that you have that same thing, or else it's going to become very apparent that you did not actually have
that you don't have it.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say I lost a game one time because someone bluffed extremely well in a limited event. There are times where I'm playing a limited event and I keep drawing lands and they can just read it on my face because I look at the top card and go, and it somehow expressed that it was a bad draw. This man was stone-faced. He would draw his card and just look at it and then think for a minute, and then pass turn. And I should have been able to attack and kill him, but it made me nervous about what kind of combat tricks he might have had available. I ended up losing, and he showed me his hand, and it was all lands.
Oh, no!
Yes, this guy bluffed me into a win. That's
awesome.
Don't underestimate even holding up mana to... don't underestimate the amount of information you hide from your opponents when you're not playing only on your turn.
Yep, absolutely. And another thing that this does and why you want to play at instant speed more is you're less likely to put yourself in tough positions. If you're always tapping out, if you're all on your turn, if you're always playing your cards on your turn, then there's a chance that you're going to overplay and overextend yourself and get punished, where someone else is going to sneak out a win because they all of a sudden came up with a powerful combo and you're not going to be able to interact with it because you didn't leave up the mana, or they're going to just play a board wipe and you're going to lose a lot of the stuff that you put all of your mana into building. So leave your options open where you can. If you have instant speed abilities, make sure that you're playing them when appropriate at instant speed.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the only way to learn is by making mistakes. You're going to find that you're going to not do this and realize, I should have, this was an instant. Why did I cast this on my turn? And again, there are also exceptions to this rule, right? Like we said, sometimes it's better to remove something on your turn. Sometimes you need to see that extra card, and it really will affect how you're going to play. So there are always exceptions, but this will really improve your play experience, and you'll be able to play more Magic. And you'll be able to be engaged on other people's turns. That is actually one of my pet peeves in Magic, is when I'm taking my turn, and not that it needs to be all eyes on me and everyone paying attention to me all the time, but on my turn, and I have to kind of just like silently play my turn because no one's really paying attention, and I say, okay, pass. And they're like, oh, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, well, I just took my turn. No one was like paying attention. It really helps you be more engaged in the game if you have mana up and have ways to interact with other players or the board state on their turns.
Because you're looking for the right time to play those cards.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
So,
well, the next mistake that newer players make is not making smart attacks. So we already talked about maybe choosing not to block and using your life total as a resource. And this is kind of on the opposite side, not making smart attacks. So some people have a fear of attacking and want to always have their creatures up to block. And this is sometimes correct, but it's not always correct.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of the inverse of wanting to always block and not take damage.
Yeah.
In the example we gave, say you have your commander out and someone is swinging with a big 10-10, it's probably right for you to take 10 damage. Yep. On the inverse, it's probably right for them to swing this big 10-10 at you.
Yeah,
because they know you're not gonna block. Even if your commander has like Death Touch, there's plenty of those that are small and have like Death Touch and
Prosper.
It's right, totally, and it's totally natural to be worried about losing your big creature.
But Prosper is such a great example because Prosper is a value engine. If the deck does not work as well if Prosper is not on the board, and he's a 1/4 death toucher, but I'm almost never blocking, even if it's like a 3/3 coming at Prosper, then I'm like, oh, I'm not going to block with Prosper because there's a chance they're going to pump it and I'm going to lose Prosper. It's more advantageous for me to keep Prosper back. So take advantage of that. If you know that your opponent has a really valuable piece on their board and that's the only thing they have to block with, start sending things at them. Get that life total down because you are going to be able to come out on top. Even if they do trade with you, if they block and trade, you are definitely coming out on top, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. I would any day trade my giant 10/10 creature for an advantage piece on board.
Yeah.
To set my opponents behind. Even if they don't lose that life, you're coming out on top. And I would say, especially if your creatures have like some sort of evasion or trample, then you're still getting through for damage and potentially, removing their best thing if they're worried enough about it. So put them in a position to make those hard decisions.
Yeah. And a lot of times your opponents may not have something to block. And you may just have, a mana dork, a 1/1, or a token that's sitting out. You should swing the token. You should just get that in that 1 damage because in Commander, a lot of times that 1 damage does truly matter. If you have an open board and you have nothing else to do with your creatures, there's no damage of them attacking back at you because they don't have any creatures, then you should be sending your creatures. You should be doing damage early in the game, even if it's just 1, 2, 3 damage at a time.
Yeah, like we said, life is a resource in Magic in general, but especially in Commander where you have so much of it. And putting pressure on that resource is a really good way to help people, to make people make harder decisions as they're trying to manage that resource. So another one here is actually a little bit of the inverse of this, where we want you to attack. Make sure you're attacking because attacking puts pressure on people. But be wary when you're attacking into a full board. And I think the big one here that we want to disclaim that is a real gotcha for new players is that remember that multiple creatures can block a single creature.
Yeah, I see this happen all the time with newer players where they'll swing out with a bunch of creatures and you just kind of like slowly are like, okay, I double block. And that feels obvious to you because you've been playing a long time. And then you see their face just kind of fall and they're like, oh, I've made a mistake. I forgot that you can block with multiple creatures.
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever you're attacking, one thing to just keep in mind, again, multiple creatures can block, and your opponent gets to choose how they block, right? And again, this may seem very obvious to people who've been playing Commander for a really long time, been playing Magic for a really long time, but attacking truly does put you at a disadvantage because your opponent is choosing how to block, right? And so it's safe to always assume that your opponent sees the best way to block and will block in such a way that gives them the most advantage and removes anything valuable for you. So when you attack, be ready to lose some creatures and at least have thought about what is the worst possible scenario here and how they block, which can be really hard. Combat math is hard. That's why people play green.
Yeah.
Right?
You let them do the math.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm attacking with a giant with 2 20/20s. What are you going to do about it?
Yep. No, that's awesome. And it's, once again, gets easier the more Commander you play, the more Magic you play. These things are going to start to come more naturally where attack into open boards, be prepared to lose creatures if you're attacking into a full board, so really think that through first. These are things that you'll pick up on. Just keep playing more Magic.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last one we want to talk about here has less to do with gameplay and more to do with your wallet. And it is a lot of new players will buy a lot of boosters and bundles instead of just buying singles if they want to get cards to upgrade their Commander decks.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're buying boosters, play with them. Don't open boosters just to try and chase singles or the cards that you want. You should draft, or at least play something like a Winchester draft or something like that. Or you know what? If you do like to gamble and just open booster packs, or you like to give them as gifts or receive them as gifts, totally fine. You should open them. We're not going to tell you how to live your life, but there is some value that you're leaving on the table if you're not playing with your boosters, or if you're after just a card, just buying the single and not buying a bunch of booster packs.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say the audacity of us telling people not to buy boosters. Yeah. I think I've bought so many boosters in my life.
Oh, totally.
And I've cracked a couple of booster boxes, And really, this is what led me to this opinion, right? Is I cracked a couple of booster boxes, hoping to chase some of the big cards in there, and walked away with like a sixth of the value of what I paid for the booster box, and thought,
Yeah.
okay, I don't think I need to do this
You could
again.
have just spent the money on the booster boxes to get every card you wanted out of the set.
Yeah.
Right?
Right,
Like,
exactly.
You could have just bought all of the singles that you wanted and probably still saved money in some cases.
Yeah, exactly. And especially in a group like ours, and hopefully yours that is very proxy friendly, you don't need more than one copy of these chase cards that you are looking for, because if you wanted another deck, just proxy it. Who cares? And even if you don't want to buy the card, just proxy it. So buy singles if you want to collect.
Yep.
Proxy if you don't want to buy singles. And you can buy booster packs, buy bundles, give them as gifts, open them for fun, but you're gamble. It's a gamble. So
Yeah.
you can either do that or go to Vegas, I think.
Yeah. And beyond singles, there are a few other sealed products that are worth buying, in our opinion. Precons, they're known value. You know the cards that are getting printed, and recently, luckily, the last couple of sets of precons have had really good reprints. So you're adding to your collection, you're getting the cards that you need to power up your commander decks or build the decks that you want. And then the other one is secret lairs. This is another area where there's often some pretty good reprints. If you don't have some of these more powerful cards and they get reprinted in a secret lair, or you just really like the art from the secret lair. I'm a huge proponent for buying secret lairs, even if the quote unquote value of the cards is low. If you like the art, you like the secret lair, just buy it. That's a really cool thing to collect.
Yeah, and not all secret lairs and not all precons are worth it, right? Like,
No.
I'm still collecting, and the most recent precons from Murders at Karlov Manor were amazing.
They were really good.
Really, really good. Really good
And fun.
reprints. And fun decks, cool strategies. Those, I think, were definitely worth it. Some of them may not be. If you're interested in the value, if you just think the deck is fun, buy it. Buy it,
Yep.
play it, who cares? If you're looking for value, some are more worth it than others. But yeah, definitely singles, pre-constructed commander decks, and secret lairs are the things we would recommend. So the last thing here is just an honorable mention. We talked about it last week. If you didn't listen to our last episode, go listen to it. We talk about how you can troubleshoot your commander decks. And as a part of that, we mentioned the Command Zones deck building template and our adjustments to it. And
Yeah, because a lot of newer players are not running enough of X, and you hear us talk about ramp, card draw, interaction all the time. We've talked about it in past episodes. We're talking about it in this episode. We'll talk about it in future episodes, because we call them the vegetables of your commander deck. You need to be eating your vegetables, and a lot of newer players aren't putting up enough ramp or card draw or interaction or even lands. And so we do talk about it more extensively in our last episode. So make sure to go give it a listen.
yeah, absolutely. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This has been common mistakes that new players make. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you feel like you've become a better player from today. Be sure to check out our next episode next week. We release every Monday at 7 a.m. Mountain Time. Maybe subject to change. We're still deciding on that. But as of now, every Monday at 7 a.m. Check us out on YouTube. Check us out on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on thecommanderpod.com. You can reach out to us there. You can send us, there's links to our email address there, links to the YouTube, links to the Spotify. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for listening. And remember to always pay the one.